I'm South African fine artist Lillian Gray, and today I'm going to show you how to paint botanicals using watercolors. So it's exciting to venture into the world of watercolors. I just want to give you a word of caution. Watercolors is probably the hardest medium to learn because it's so unforgiving, and you really need to keep your wits about you so you don't make a mess of things. It doesn't offer a lot of grace like other mediums with pencil and charcoal and oils where we can just, hide our mistakes or paint over our mistakes. With watercolor, we have to be cautious, and that's because we are painting with these beautiful, beautiful, intense pigments. That's basically colored water, so it has this stunning translucency to it. And to get an effective watercolor, you want to preserve that characteristic of the paint. Quickly going to cover a list of the supplies that I'll be using for this tutorial. I have got masking fluid, which is basically like a liquid masking tape that I'll be using to preserve my whites. More on that a little bit later. I've got 2 jars, one to get clean water from and one to actually wash the brushes in, because if your water gets dirty, your whole painting will get dirty and you'll lose that wonderful pure bright pigment that we love so much about watercolor. I like having quite a big palette where I get various areas to mix. This one's plastic. You also get porcelain. Porcelain is a little bit nicer, but depends on what you guys can find. I'm using Winsor & Newton Artist Range pigment. I honestly believe that you need to spend a lot of money on proper pigment, and it will be just devastating if you struggle with cheap stuff that's filled with chalk and waxes and just uses fillers to make the paint cheaper, but then your painting's also much duller. So it's really worth it investing into proper stuff. I will put the links where you can buy everything in the comments down below. I have got a variety of brushes. I like some. With watercolor, it's all about how much water the brush can actually hold. So I will be using a range of brushes from small to large. Because I'm Lillian Gray and I like a lot of patience, I also have a hairdryer to speed some things up because I don't like waiting. And I've got paper towel. You can never have enough paper towel. I'm also using masking tape to tape my board down onto a drawing board. So I'm using the Aquafine Watercolor Smooth Hot Rolled paper. I absolutely adore this paper. It's probably my favorite watercolor paper. It gives me a very fine satin finish and I can see all the little details that I'm doing, and especially with the way that I like doing watercolors, which is more of a dry brush technique, your hot rolled paper works better. Step 1 would be to draw your image, right? To transfer the image. Now, I know that life is limited, we're all very stressed, we're all very busy, and not everybody is a full-time artist. So you might have limited time to actually do art. I do realize that not everybody could learn to draw, but they really would like to paint. There are various tips and tricks that you can transfer your image onto your paper. The one way is you get a carbon trace paper where you can trace your image onto your watercolor paper. You also get little projectors that you can project directly from your cell phone. I am going to draw it out because I find when I draw the image, I have a deeper understanding of what I'm going to paint. It's quite meditative for me to actually draw the flower and really understand its structure before I start painting it. If your pad is not glued tight, you need to remove your page from your pad. If it is glued into a block, you need to keep it in the block until you're 100% done and it's dried for at least a day and a half. Then you can cut it off and remove it from your block. The block and the gum glue on the side helps to keep your paper stress-free, and it prevents waves and bubbles. Alright, I've removed my paper. I'm going to tape it down onto my drawing board, which is just a normal Masonite MDF board. I'm using masking tape or painter's tape, as some people refer to it. Now, not all masking tape has been created equal. Some will actually rip the paper afterwards and remove it. So it's such a fine line. You don't want a very weak masking fluid that creates bleed, but you also don't want too strong that actually rips your paper. So when you find one you like, buy a lot of it and keep it. I'm just quickly going to tape it down. I'm also going to be taping a test strip. Now, my test strip area, I see it as a landing strip for your paint. That's where I test my pigment before I commit to my actual drawing. If you're going to demarcate a text strip on the side, just make sure that this is not going to change the size of your actual paper. This is a standard A3 and it's easy to find a frame for an A3 because you're going to have to frame your watercolor. However, when you're going to start doing test strips and stuff on your page, it will change the size. So just make sure you actually trim it down to a size that you can find a frame for it. I'm now going to draw out my flowers. It's very important to use a pencil that is quite hard in its graphite. If you're going to use a 4, 6B, 8B, it gives off a lot of graphite. It will go into your watercolors and it will really dull the paint, which isn't great. So you want to be working with your H's. H2 pencil works really well. I've got an HB here, which is a nice hard one. Clutch pencils work the best, according to me, to really get as little graphite as possible onto your paper. For reference, I like having the printout, but what I like most, especially when I'm doing watercolors, is to actually have my reference available on a phone. I love the fact that you can zoom in, zoom out, really get to see all the little details. Use technology to your advantage to really get to understand what you're drawing. The wonderful thing about drawing botanical, it's very forgiving. So if you make a slight mistake, it really doesn't matter. It's different to a portrait where if you draw an eye a little bit too big or out of line or a nose a little bit skew, people notice it instantly. When we draw flowers or fruit or any organic shape, it's so forgiving because nobody's really going to look at your art with a reference right next to it. So don't bash yourself up when you get things wrong. Go with the flow, change it, erase it, or incorporate it in a different way, or call it a beautiful oops. But I don't want you to get so stuck into the drawing that you never get to experience the joy of painting. Just a quick few tips. Apply it quite thickly. The thicker it is, the easier it is to peel it off at the end. It's not something that's going to stay on your paper forever. Apply it quite generously so you can easily peel it off at the end. If you go too thin, it's really struggles. You can actually damage the fibers of your paper as you try and rub off your masking fluid. Also, be sure to wash your brush immediately afterwards because the masking fluid can really damage your watercolor brushes. I even have a dedicated masking fluid little brush so that I don't use it for other stuff. Okay, I'm going to speed up the drying of this masking fluid and I will now play you the song of the hairdryer. I'm going to use a big brush that can contain a lot of water for my washes. We basically want to start by building very thin washes. That's really translucent. You do not want to start dark with watercolor. You want to build your darks over time. So I am going to be mixing my first wash, and looking at my reference, I need to be able to mix a purpley blue. Now, a color is never just one thing. A color is always two things. And what do I mean by that? When we get a green, we can either have a warm green that's more towards the yellows, the lime greens, or we could have a cold green that's more our turquoises or our viridian greens, which is more towards the blue side of the color wheel. So when I look at this purple, I'm going to ask myself, yes, it's purple, but what else is it? It is a warm purple, so it's leaning towards the reds. So I'm going to add a bit of magenta, which is going to be our Windsor violet mixed with our ultramarine blue to really get a nice purple. And once I've made my first wash, I'm going to go to my test strip and just make sure it is the actual color that I want. Getting a smooth wash in watercolor is probably the best skill you would ever possess. It's also one of the hardest ones to learn. It looks so freaking easy, just getting a smooth wash, but it's not. So if you don't get it right the first time, don't stress out. It takes time. Okay, that's my first wash. If I'm going to do my greens now, it will bleed into my purple, so I really don't want that. I need to wait for this to dry. Now, as you can see, I've gone for quite a thick wash because I want to actually get a bit of pooling. Pooling isn't always bad, and cauliflowers isn't always bad. It's to understand what the water's doing for when you want them and when you don't want them. So I am not going to use a hairdryer on this wash right now because if I was going to blow this water, it will just go all over the place. I'm just going to give this wash some time to just rest and get absorbed into the paper, and then I can always blow it a little bit once it's settled to make sure it's 100% dry before I go into my greens. I'm going to analyze the green in the stem, and I'm going to just zoom in here on the phone and really ask myself, what is the mid color? So not what is the darkest green or what is the lightest green, what is like the mid tone, right? And if I look at that green and I analyze it, I'm going to ask myself, okay, is that green leaning towards the cold side of the color wheel or to the warm side of the color wheel? And I'm going to see that it's leaning towards the warm side. It's got a bit of a yellow in it. So what I've done is I've done sap green mixed with a bit of ochre, just to give it that yellow undertone. And I think what I've got here is absolutely the perfect color. So once again, I'm just going to test it on my test strip, make sure, yes, that's the color I need. Using a tiny flat brush here, and I am going to just wash in my stems and really just concentrate so I don't go over my lines. Make sure I give it a good base. So bear in mind, wherever there's masking fluid now, the green won't be on your paper because we'll be removing the masking fluid quite soon. So I've now built my basic washes. I just want to actually also add a little bit more of French ultramarine washes into these little flowers. We've now reached the point where my basic washes are done. I'm going to be removing the rubber cement, and I'm going to do that by just rubbing my finger. It's going to be very important that you make sure your finger and your hands are nice and clean. And as you can see, applying it quite generously makes it easy to remove. And I've now preserved the whites that I wanted to keep white. So let's get rubbing away. I've removed the masking fluid. I've got a lot of hard edges that I maybe don't want. I've got some, the wash is ending quite harsh. And people don't always realize that you can now go and feather this out and really make it calm. So I've just got a little bit of water on a tiny brush, and I can go and feather the edge of where the masking fluid was. I've feathered out a bit of my washes, just made the transitions a little bit smoother. I've now got a bit of Van Dyke's brown mixed with a bit of burnt sienna into my sap green, and I'm going to really just start doing the dark side of the stem. So I always joke, it's, mostly art is just Star Wars. It's a fight between the dark and the light side. So always look at where's the darks, where's the light, where's the dark, where's the light. So for now, I'm going to focus on the darks and just go along my stem to really put in all my darks. Detail. I do want to add a little bit of white back, or try and get some white back. There's a few ways you could do that. You could either wet the certain area that you want with water and then use paper towel to lift that area if you've added too much pigment. Another way to do this is with designer gouache. So gouache is not a watercolor, it is very different to watercolor, but you can use a bit of gouache to add a little bit of white or that last bit of oomph to your painting. Now, the way I've been taught, very strict academic watercolors, you're not allowed to use gouache, and you tend to steer away from gouache. And I'm so glad that for so long in my watercolor career I didn't use gouache, because I think gouache can really become a crutch, and you can really rely on gouache and you cannot develop your watercolor skills as good as you possibly could, because you always know gouache will come to the rescue. Da, 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 da. So I don't want you to rely on gouache, but if there's areas where you just want to add a little bit of white back, because sometimes we need to just get that spark back into our drawing and make sure we use the entire value scale. So then you can use a little bit of gouache. And you don't want it to look like somebody was playing with Tipex on your painting. So you really also need to now just blend in some of that. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my final layer of my darkest darks. And I don't want to cover all these beautiful washes. I still have my original washes shining through at quite a lot of areas. So I'm not covering all my washes at all. I'm going to go in and add a little bit of drama. Everywhere there is the darkest dark, I'm now going to go in with a tiny bit of black. But black is like arsenic. You only need a little bit to kill someone, right? So you need to be very careful that you don't go too crazy on the black. Okay, I'm just going to add a bit of cadmium yellow into these centers of these flowers. Um, Okay, so we've got some flowers that are closer to us and some flowers that are further away from our eye. Those that are closest to us is more crisp and more in focus, and those further away are more blended. Now, this is quite a scary move to do, but I do think it's important to really fade those ones that are further away. So I'm going to take just a dry, just a goat hair brush with no pigment on it, and just add some water to it. And I'm going to blur that flower, I'm going to blur a little bit of that flower's edge and that flower's edge to create that depth of field we get here. Okay, to create a little bit more depth of field, I'm just going to do like a small washes here of more flowers in the background, just to create more of a overlap. Sometimes what works in a photo doesn't work in an artwork, and you kind of need to figure out what you need to add so that your painting can communicate the feeling that you want. And that's it for a watercolor. I hope you guys enjoyed it and you've learned how to build in your dark slowly over time. And I hope you guys enjoy your final result. Please do share with me on the social media and do please tag our channel so I can get to see what you guys are up to. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. I'm Lillian Gray, South African fine artist. Remember to subscribe and like our channel. It really helps us to create more amazing content.